Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I hope to be able to use this properly. Okay. Now, there were many travelers who passed through Persepolis for different reasons, and especially the site was better known from the 17th century onwards. The first systematic excavation started by the Oriental Institute in the 1930s, and one of the main interventions that they did was to build some buildings to house their labs and their offices. And what they chose was the harem complex, and which you can see here. This palace, which is called Palace C, is the one which they chose. It was a second choice. But anyway, they chose this one, and present day, it's the present day site museum of Persepolis. After Ernst Hertzfeld, who was the first director of the excavations, was Erich Schmidt, and he carried out a lot of excavations, especially of the Treasury, which we can see here. This is the present-day Treasury. But looking at the old photos, you can observe how deep these walls were. And this is here, these are these walls that we have Achaemenid plaster work. You can see this is a person, how tall they were. But presently, it's in this shape. And we should confess that we lost a lot of historical material because maybe in those days it was difficult to restore clay brick buildings. For a period, it was during the war and afterwards, the site was managed by the Iranian directors and Iranian archaeologists, and under Sami and Tajwidi and Mostafavi. But in the 1960s, there was collaboration with the Italian group of Ismeo, and they intervened in the yellow areas, which you can see. And their work, their interventions, mainly followed the Charter of Venice of 1964. So every intervention that they did, they put a date on it, and they showed what was new and what was old. They tried to follow the Charter. In 1979, Persepolis was inscribed on the World Heritage Sites of UNESCO, together with two other sites, which was Chogazambil, Ziggurat of Chogazambil in Khuzestan, and the Maidan of Naqsh Jahan in Isfahan. And we should remember that in those days, the nomination dossiers were very short because also the sites were very well known and they were mainly monuments. The description of the justification of Persepolis says that it was a dynastic city, the symbol of the Achaemenid dynasty, and what remains today dominating the city is the immense stone terrace but as we just saw that recent studies have shown that we actually have much more than the terrace. The ICOMOS, who is the advisory body who does the evaluation for UNESCO World Heritage Sites, recommended criteria 1, 3, and 6 for the inscription. In 2001, the Persepolis Foundation was established, and they dealt with various management issues such as accesses, services, security, visitor management, rainwater, surface consumption, research, documentation, conservation, maintenance, development control, and also capacity building, workshops, collaboration with national and international universities and experts. Among the works that they carried out was the restoration of the unfinished tomb and the reassembling of an Apadana column. This column is this one. And cleaning of the ancient water canals which are under the terrace, under the underground, under the terrace. Also, some important intervention was to protect the bas-reliefs from being touched by the visitors. They did this by installing these kind of plexiglass panels, and also with wooden, protecting the areas which were under great consumption. This is the grand stairway of access with wooden panels. Also, they built down the terrace, below the terrace, a visitor center. They installed information panels for the tourists, and also they identified various sites of touristic and historic attractions on both in Marvdasht and in Mashhad Morghab, which is the Pasargade plain. They identified, they also did other works, but I am not going now to mention other plans and maps and things that they prepared. So in 2003, there was a state of conservation report submitted to the World Heritage by Persepolis Foundation, and which was dealing with their programs for scientific studies and research. These consisted in conservation documentation, geological studies, archaeological, territorial survey, studying the ecology, and especially they noticed that there is a need for the redefinition of the site boundaries and buffer zones, and also re-evaluates the outstanding outstanding values of Persepolis. In the same report, I am quoting the report, it says that a renomination is proposed to extend the site boundaries to enclose the entire plain of Marvdasht, including Rahmat Mountain, Majnobad quarries, and other historic structures. So this, in fact, means that we have to redefine the outstanding universal value of Persepolis. So what is the statement of outstanding universal value. It's a report that should be given to UNESCO. It includes a brief description of the site, criteria, condition of integrity and authenticity, protection and management, according to the operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. So looking at significance of Persepolis, we can say that association with ideas, which is, in fact, Persepolis is a political message. Interchange of values, new architectural language, a masterpiece, testimony to civilization, cultural landscape. So if we look at these, association with the ideas goes under criterion 6. So the site is to be directly or tangibly associated with events or living traditions, with ideas or with beliefs, with artistic and literary works of outstanding universal significance. This criterion we can see in, for example, in a stairway of this palace. This is the so-called central palace. It's next to the Apadana, south of Apadana. What does it do? It transmits message through inscriptions, bas-reliefs, and architecture. It is a unity of these three languages. So Apadana stairway, it's a representation of the empire. Still we are in criterion 6. Or the audience scene in Persepolis and on Alexandersarcophagus, this, which is on the internal side of the shield of a Persian warrior. On this sarcophagus, the so-called, it's called Alexandersarcophagus, but it's not Alexandersarcophagus, I should say, which was dating to the 4th century BC, but which was discovered in the second half of the 19th century in Zidane, present-day Lebanon. And so these messages of the empire of Persepolis, of the Achaemenids, were dispatched all over the empire. Zidane is here. So what is important here, that we have to continue doing research to identify the issues and their significance. Capacity building and awareness raising is very important at this stage. The other significance of Persepolis was interchange of values, criterion 2 of the convention. To exhibit an important interchange of human values over a span of time or within a cultural area of the world on development in architecture or technology, monumental arts, town planning, or landscape design. So this interchange of values, it's all over the empire. But we have not really done much study on this empire. But what we have found is contribution of peoples of the empire in building Achaemenid structures and the iconography according to the formula of Darius, and which is, we can find it here. and the impact of this new art in the empire. This is again found in this area of the world. So it's a kind of bilateral influence. Here again, we have to do research to identify the issues and significances, and by capacity building and awareness raising. Criterion 4, to be an outstanding example of a type of building. We are speaking of typology. Architectural or technical ensemble or landscape which illustrates a significant stage in human history. So here, it means we are dealing with a new architectural language. So, as we know, square is a holy form in building, especially in antiquity. And this architecture uses a lot of square, makes use of square in expressing itself. If we consider the central hall of the Apadana, we can identify a system of grid lines that the position of most of the structures on the terrace have been assigned accordingly. As an example, the first phase of the Treasury, this is the first phase, corresponds to twice the dimension of the central hall of the Apadana. Or, speaking of the facades, this is the frontal facade of the Palace of Darius, which is 1 and 2 equal squares. And the lateral facades, each one is 1 square. So we have 4 equal squares that form the facades. Then, speaking of the morphology of the structures, we can identify this simple form with let's say two columns, and this U form, which we call form A, and then form B. This can be called an open form and a closed form. By putting 2 of these, we can have a central hall with a portico, central hall with 2 porticos, with 3 porticos. By putting them this way, we can arrive at the courtyard and another courtyard, which we have here. But by combination from A and B, we can then make a reading of the structures of Persepolis, finding the simple form of a simple palace, which is Palace of Darius, and more elaborate forms which can become a closed environment like the Treasury. At the extreme, we have an introvert form, which is the Treasury, and extrovert form, which can be the Apadana. This form eventually has become what we call Kushk system. So also, when we consider these forms, we can see that the size of the spaces change, but the proportions do not change. They are always the same. Speaking of this typology, we can see that it is not only the structures on the terrace, but also on the structures outside the terrace. Also, the tomb, the south tomb on Persepolis has its own proportions, similar to the same architecture. And also here, what we do is, our guidelines would be to do research, to identify typology, morphology, and especially training conservation and conservation of the built heritage. So criterion 1, I haven't put the criteria in order because I wanted, you think that masterpiece is the most important one, but there is a kind of sequence of the building of the site, and at the end you produce a masterpiece. So I put the criteria on a different order. So here now we have arrived to a masterpiece, which to represent a masterpiece of human creative genius. And Persepolis is still a grandiose architectural creation. These are sentences from the 1979 dossier, nomination dossier. So the masterpiece includes the grand stairway of entrance. Then we have the Apadana, the palace of the main gate of all nations, or Xerxes. The Apadana, 100 columns, the harem, the so-called harem complex with the museum, and then Palace of Xerxes and Palace of Darius. Anyway, and then we have two tombs, one here and the other there, and the other one in the back, which was recently restored, as I mentioned. When we are dealing with the monuments, then what we do is we do restoration, which means that according to the Venice Charter of 1964, it says the process of restoration is a highly specialized operation. Its aim is to preserve and reveal the aesthetic and historic values of the monument, and is based on respect for original material and authentic documents. Means that our sources of information should be true. Sorry. So, criterion 3 deals with testimony, to bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or to a civilization which is living or which has disappeared. Here in this criterion, we mainly, most of the sites which are inscribed according to its criterion are mostly archaeological sites. Here we have an archaeological site, and Persepolis is classified among the world's greatest architecture, which bear witness of a unique quality to a most ancient civilization. I read quickly because of time. Now, again, testimony. We have to consider all the elements that contribute to this criteria of testimony. If we look at ICOMOS Charter for the preservation and management of protection and management of the archaeological heritage, we can see that it says the protection of the archaeological heritage must be based upon the fullest possible knowledge of its extent and nature. So consequently, we have to do a general survey, we have to do an archaeological survey, and this is important in order to identify the extension of our site. For example, Majdabad quarry should be included in the area of our our of our site. Criterion 5, to be an outstanding example of a traditional human settlement, land use or sea use, which is representative of a culture or cultures or human interaction with the environment. So we have here a human intervention with the environment. We have sacred mountains here. We have all kinds of archaeological, I mean the landscape, the valley of Marvdasht, the sacred mountains, everything. This is a interaction between the builders and the environment. And we can see that it's not only the terrace, but all the areas around it make part of this ensemble. Especially, also it was mentioned in the periodical report that, for example, Naqsh Rostam makes one whole unity with Persepolis. You cannot separate them. And so when we are now, after all of these studies, we are dealing with Persepolis, we have to consider it as it's on the whole of the area that it has its influence. And looking at the cultural landscape, it is not only what we see, it is also what we don't see. It is which has not yet been excavated. So the information is there. We just have to go and look for it. And we cannot go and build on sites that we have not carried any investigation. So the strategy for the protection and conservation of cultural landscape means that the context is very important, and also the condition of integrity. If we don't include Naqsh Rostam or the quarries, our integrity is in danger, let's say. So another important thing is the identification and involvement of the stakeholders. Stakeholders are all those people who have something to say on the site and they should contribute, those who live there. And here we get into planning and management instruments. But in this area, we have lots of threats and environmental risks. We have polluting industries. In fact, when you stand with the gate of Zexes to your back, overlooking the Marvdasht Valley, you can see fumes in front of you from the chimneys of an industry. Extension of Marvdasht city is a great problem. Extension of villages is a great problem. Agriculture and industrial development are problems, and also climate change is a problem. This, the surroundings of the terrace in 1970s, we can see that the situation nowadays is more changed. That is one of the reasons that, again, in the State of Conservation report in 2003, the management of Persepolis proposed the extending the area of, this is the terrace, and this is a first buffer zone extension, which is buffer zone 1, and then you have this buffer zone 2 area. Each buffer zone has its own criteria of protection. But this was not even yet this was not considered enough. So there is also a buffer zone, buffer 3 area of which is the landscape area. And you can see that it also covers, up to the ridge of the mountains. But the problem is not only in the Marvdasht Valley. We also have this problem in the Mashhad Morghab Valley, which is the valley of Pasargade. And here, Pasargade, in fact, is twice on the World Heritage List. Once as Pasargade, capital of the first Achaemenid, and the Achaemenid, the founder of the Achaemenid dynasty, and the second as makes part of the serial nomination of Persian Garden. Here we have problems with managing development. Finished. So my last word is that we have to consider Marvdasht and Mashhad Morghab Plain and consider them as one whole and not separately. Thank you.